Y'all can be seated. Hi, my name's Adam Reed, and with me on the panel is Miss Jackson and Mr. Perea. And I want to thank you for being here to attend Nate McQueen's senior thesis that he has to share with us. In just a second, he'll share his thesis, and then he'll come over here, and we're going to grill him and give him his last final hazing here at MCA before he can turn the table back on us. So let me pray real quick, and then we'll get started. Dear God, I thank you for Nate. I thank you for what he means to so many people at this school. I thank you for his help this year in great books and fine arts and saving me many times throughout the year. And I thank you for his heart. I thank you for his mind and the platform that he has today to share a passion of his. And I pray that you open our hearts and minds to learn from this. And I pray that he just glorifies you through all he says today. In your name we pray. Amen. Amen.
If I say, "May the force be with you," most of you would know what I'm referring to, except Casey. That phrase is one of the most universally recognizable sayings out there, and it originates, of course, from the movie called Star Wars, which came out in 1977. Along with the previously mentioned phrase, terms like lightsabers and Darth Vader are easily recognized by most people, and it all started with a simple sci-fi movie. Even though few things can claim to be as widely known as Star Wars, there are still many names in the film industry that most people have heard of and can at least say, "That's a movie," or "I know that name." There are many examples, but the most popular could include ones like Steven Spielberg, Michael Bay, and M. Night Shyamalan, or movie stars like Brad Pitt and Angelina Jolie. Recognizable movies include Pulp Fiction, The Shawshank Redemption, and Toy Story. The wide recognizability of these stars and titles show that movies are a big part of our lives and culture as a whole. And isn't something that's such a common part of our lives bound to influence us? We as humans are very easily influenced by the things we are exposed to. Have you ever gone to an event just because a friend told you to? Or bought a product because you saw a good ad for it? Think of the massive increase in the popularity of chess after the Queen's Gambit came out on Netflix. One example of the influence in movies concerns the viewer's reaction to on-screen violence. Those who have watched enough action or horror movies have probably gotten used to bloody character deaths and close-up, gross-out shots of wounds. A common phrase for this mental development is desensitization to violence. Watch enough R-rated movies and you will get used to the blood and gore and stop being shocked by it. And while the violence in movies is all fake, most filmmakers strive to be realistic with what's depicted on screen. And fake or not, should you be fine with seeing decapitations, brain matter flying everywhere after headshots, blood splatters after someone is stabbed, and more? Think about what those violent acts are. That character is dying on screen and we feel unaffected. This desensitization can make us numb to death. There is a psychological reason for this desensitization. We as people love comfort. We are obsessed with it. And a common way we find comfort is through familiarity. Which is more awkward, the first date or the 50th? Which is more nerve-wracking, the first day at a job or the 100th day at a job? Which is more shocking, your first gory horror movie or the 30th? The more we are exposed to things, the more familiar we become with them, and then we become more comfortable with them. This desensitization to violence occurs when we have seen it pervasively. Violence is not the only thing movies can make us comfortable with through familiarity. Take, for example, the use of profanity. When you first start watching movies that use strong language, it may stick out to you, but eventually vulgar and profane phrases become part of the normal movie watching experience. Or watch enough sweet, romantic films, and eventually you will come to expect the madly in love couple to have sex, because it happens so frequently in romantic movies. Movies like The Notebook, The Shape of Water, and Titanic all have sex scenes. This often normalizes in our minds the act of premarital sex. We can start to view sex between a boyfriend and girlfriend rather than only between husband and wife as normal, even though the Bible is very clear that sex outside of marriage is wrong. Another way films can normalize certain things is through the way they portray the characters, ideas, or events. Most, if not all, movies contain biases because they are made by imperfect humans with their own worldviews. For example, let's take one topic and form two different movie plots to illustrate this point. The topic is a man who murdered someone is sentenced to death. The first movie plot is one in which the perspective is the death penalty is wrong. The film would likely do its best to make you sympathize with the murderer by showing you past life hardships and struggles, forcing you to relate to him by giving him normal human experiences and relationships, and showing that the murder was a crime of passion or a mistake that he regrets. If the movie is well made, you will likely leave the theater thinking that the man did not deserve a punishment as harsh as death. As for the second movie, its plot wants you to think of the death penalty as just. In order to do this, it would likely show audiences something along the lines of how great the murder victim was, giving the lovely husband a wife and kids that depended on him. Suddenly, a deranged masked man comes along and kills him, ruining the lives of his wife and their two innocent young daughters. Films can easily manipulate the way you feel about a certain topic because it will typically only show you the pros of one side and the cons of another. For a real-life example, let's look at the two different portrayals of Joker in the movies Joker and The Dark Knight. Joker does an incredible job of making you empathize with Arthur Fleck, the title character, even though he does objectively terrible things. This is because the filmmakers show Arthur meeting misfortune and abuse around every corner before he finally snaps. You see what awful things he is going through, and you can't help but feel sorry for him. You are transported into his position, and it feels terrible. Now think of the Joker and the Dark Knight. In this movie's depiction, he is the antagonist, because along with his criminal and immoral actions, he causes direct conflict with the protagonist and hero, Batman. According to traditional story structure, the antagonist's wants should conflict with the protagonist's wants, and the Dark Knight is one of the best examples of this. We do not sympathize with this Joker. In Joker, Arthur Fleck is the protagonist, the main character in the story, and we have been programmed by traditional story structure to root for the main character. For my thesis, I interviewed Matt Maxwell, who once worked in Hollywood and is now the resident filmmaker at ACU and also directed the documentary Finding Home in Boomtown. In the interview, he said that while movies can be entertaining, the underlying story is that we are trying to convey a message, a truth, if you will, and we wrap these truths in stories. Man has always been fascinated by storytelling. This can be seen long before the age of film through things like books, theater, and music. Stories have been one of the greatest ways to communicate throughout mankind. Even Jesus knew the value of stories. Some of his greatest and most well-known teachings were parables, short fictional stories he told to convey a specific message. When hearing stories, though we know they may be fake, we are still able to relate to the events and the characters in those stories. And no matter what medium it is presented in, if the story is put together well, it will feel real to you even if the situation is not realistic. A great example of this is the movie Blade Runner 2049. Cinematographer Roger Deakins, who is in charge of the camera work in the movie, explained in an interview that while the orange color scheme in the movie may not be realistic, if he did his job right, the audience should still believe it's real in the context of the world the story takes place in. This is vital to movies, because if audiences can't buy into the plot, settings, and characters, how are we expected to believe in the message the film is conveying? Because of this, watching a movie can be an eye-opening experience. As Mark Twain put it, travel is fatal to prejudice, bigotry, and narrow-mindedness, and many of our people need it sorely on these accounts. Broad, wholesome, charitable views of men and things cannot be acquired by vegetating in one little corner of the earth all one's lifetime. While watching a movie may not be physical traveling, it transports you to another world crafted by another person with their own unique influences, worldviews, and opinions they feel they need to share. Watching a movie is seeing the world through different eyes. And not only are you being told a message by the director, it's message hidden in plot. It's truth wrapped in story. And because of this, analyzing the movie, whether just as the movie unfolds in order to follow the plot, or long after it's over, simply makes you think about what the film is trying to say more. Through a film's message, art style, and plot, it communicates with us and gives us representation of things we may not otherwise get to experience. You may not be able to travel physically to another country, but a movie can be a great reference to cultural differences in various lifestyles. Saving Private Ryan gives those of us who have not served in the armed forces the most realistic and horrifying depiction of war that we can have other than actual war footage. Schindler's List makes sure that we do not forget the evils of the Nazis and how inhumane the concentration camps were. Even though movies are not the only way that people tell stories, film stands out to us due to the unique way it combines art forms. Paintings, music, and writing stories are art forms that have stood the test of time and have always appealed to mankind. Paintings of visual art is absorbed into film through the visual style of a movie. Music is drawn in through the film's score. And lastly, stories make up the screenplay of a film and they drive the plot forward. Different forms of art speak to people in different ways, which gives film the opportunity to impact audiences on multiple levels due to its combination of art styles. Given that film has had such an effect on individual people, and that society is nothing more than a collective group of individuals, it makes sense that film would affect our society's culture as well. As Francesco Cassetti puts it in his book, Eye of the Century, Film Experience Modernity, film was not only the perfect translator of the last century, but also an active agent in determining how its turbulent decades would unfold. Cassetti is saying that not only did film simply reflect what had already happened, it shaped our views of past events. This, in turn, changed our outlook on the future and impacted the way we handled life afterwards in response. Cassetti described film in the sense that the film camera is an eye. Just as we as humans do, the camera lens watches and observes, and then processes what it sees in its own unique way. Cinema presents things not as they are, but as the camera sees them. Just as we do with our eyesight, the camera lens sees the world and interprets it, and presents its own view on things, and tells us how it thinks it should respond, how we should respond to certain events and ideas. Film also gives the impression of being inside the seen world, but which at the same time maintains a sense of distance. It takes you into the story it's telling you and presents you with the filmmaker's personal beliefs and thoughts. It is also easy to see how film matches itself to the current social climate. 50 years ago, a gay romance movie would have been shunned, and that has changed as the cultural view of homosexuality has flipped. In the past few years, some of the most acclaimed films have focused on homosexuality, movies like Call Me By Your Name and Moonlight. Another great example of this is Ellen. In the 1990s, Ellen DeGeneres was the star of a popular sitcom called Ellen. During its 4th season run, Ellen came out as gay publicly, and soon after her character on the show did as well. The show faced a large amount of backlash and was canceled soon after, with many saying that Ellen's career was over. Now, in 2021, Ellen has a talk show in its 18th season, and it's clear that the view on homosexuality has changed drastically, as many TV shows and movies feature homosexual characters in the name of diversity. While films change with the times, it isn't completely passive, as it also helps to change the times. In 1968, the 10th episode in Star Trek's 3rd season did something which was unheard of at the time. It premiered during a time in America when racial segregation was still prominent, and in this episode, a white man kissed a black woman. The kiss was not romantic, as the characters were being forced to kiss by aliens, but even with the context, this was a big change. Studio executives were concerned about getting negative reactions from Southern television stations, and they were supposed to film an alternative version just in case. However, that plan was deliberately ruined by the two actors. Over the years, as racial integration or desegregation in America has risen, this is now seen as completely normal, but this was a big deal for a TV show in the 60s. Most, if not all, filmmakers are aware of the effect they can have. Most who study film theory would argue that a good director makes a point of giving deeper meaning to their films. Because of film's proficiency in communication, it should be the goal of a director to have people in deeper thought as they leave the theater, so that the voice of cinema is not put to waste. For example, on the surface, the movie Ad Astra is about a man who's looking for his father, who is lost in space, in order to get help in stopping a cosmic threat that could harm those on Earth. However, the film's plot is a device used to convey an underlying message. If you watch the trailer, the first line you hear is, "I do what I do because of my dad." As a plot device, this line simply states that he pursued his career because he was following in his father's footsteps. However, its second, less plot-obvious meaning is that his strained relationship with his father shaped how he would act in life and negatively impacted his outlook on relationships. Good films use their power and influence to tell us great stories that we can learn from. When you open your mind up to a film, you are also opening your mind up to what the artist, the person behind the story, has to say. Psalm 119:37 says, "Turn my eyes away from worthless things. Preserve my life according to your word." Film can be a fantastic and meaningful thing. While most movies are not purposefully grounded in Scripture, many still contain truths that the Bible would support. Interstellar has a great message about love, which is seen through the relationship between the main character and his daughter. American Beauty, which is a very rough and very R-rated film, has great themes of seeing beauty in the world and is also a tragic picture of how people can handle personal crisis. Some films, like Silence and Signs, deal directly with themes of faith. The danger is that when watching a movie, we completely open our mind up to it, making our thoughts vulnerable to whatever is contained within the film. Sadly, there are plenty of movies that do not use their voice to spread ideas that are biblically grounded. Boyhood encourages toxic Western individualism. The John Wick series turns wrath, one of the 7 deadly sins, into a virtue, and never, rarely, sometimes, always fights for abortion rights. Proverbs 4:23 says, "Above all else, guard your heart, for everything you do flows from it." Watching a film leaves our minds surprisingly vulnerable to all sorts of things, and as the Bible says, it is important to guard your heart and your mind. Be mindful of what a film is trying to tell you, and think through if it's something that fits into a Christian worldview. Now, this doesn't mean that you can't ever watch a violent or profane R-rated movie. Some of the most meaningful films out there are rated R, and the reason they can be so profound is because of how they portray life on Earth, which is full of sin and darkness. Life on Earth is R-rated. Film has wide-reaching effects on the values and culture of a society. Filmmakers who are aware of this and use their skills constructively are able to benefit and improve the culture around them. In contrast, a filmmaker who is either unaware of his influence or worse, knowingly utilizes his influence to spread immoral messages, can have an immense negative impact. Christians ought to be active consumers, not passive ones. Baseline entertainment value should not override what we know to be good and true in the eyes of God. And therefore, we as Christians must be actively mindful of the films we watch, as the biblical truth we know is more important than entertainment or anything else. Thank you.
All right. Am I on? Okay. The hard part is over, so you can relax a little bit. Just a little.
It's just a little.
My first question, softball. What are your plans next year?
So next year, I'm going to go to Midland College, and I'm going to pursue a degree in psychology.
Okay. Why did you choose psychology?
So I've always been psychology is something that I've also been very interested in. I find it very fascinating, just learning why people do the things they do, why they think the way they think. And I also figured it's easier. I mean, I considered studying film, and that still could be a backup plan. But it's easier to have film as a hobby rather than psychology. So, yeah,
it's true. So maybe you remember this, maybe not. Maybe you might even have a different answer or belief. But what would you say a story, or more specifically, I guess, in the case of your oral, what would you say a film's purpose is?
I think with film and with anything else, the ultimate goal is to connect with the audience, to teach them something, to try to communicate something you feel that needs to be communicated, which I know I talked about a little bit in my speech. But yeah, the ultimate goal is to just communicate. It's to share this idea you have. Yeah.
Okay. Yeah, and so we talked this year in Fine Arts 2 when we went over film theory and stuff. I broke down this kind of, I made it up. I mean, maybe someone has a better and would challenge this or whatever, but I called it the 3 E's, that film or stories, purposes, entertainment, education, or empathy, are kind of its 3 impact areas. Do you think, and I think maybe this ties into your personality and maybe even what you're choosing with your future, do you think one of those 3 E's is something that you might gravitate more towards when you kind of pick what you watch?
I would say empathy. One of my favorite parts about watching a movie is just experiencing what the character is going through, like learning why they're doing what they're doing. And if a movie doesn't have good characters, then I usually won't like the movie. Or like my favorite movie ever, it's the biggest thing I love about it is the main character and his like journey through discovering like things about himself. So,
what movie is that?
That's Blade Runner 2049. Sorry, I should have mentioned that. Yeah,
I know. I didn't know if everyone did.
Yeah, should have mentioned that.
Yeah. So, I guess, do you think that there's like out of those 3, or is maybe something else that you think of, is there something that's most important in a film that you'd say, oh, these movies are better because they, educate the most, or they, teach you to look at something a different perspective, so they teach empathy better, or this is the best because it has a lot of explosions and it's pretty, and so it entertains me. Is there one that's more important or less important, or are kind of all 3 important?
I would definitely put education and empathy above the entertainment aspect. I feel like I would say education, though, because I feel like one of the things that can I think through the education, learning about things that can lead to empathy about those situations and what you're learning about. Yeah.
Okay, so maybe it's kind of tough to pull the 2 apart, I guess.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think they can go hand in hand easily.
Okay.
In movies.
Do you think a movie, we as viewers, let me ask this before then. What's the difference between, you mentioned active versus passive viewing? What do those look like?
So I think passive viewing would be I'm watching it just because I'm bored. If you watch a movie because you're bored and you need something to do, that's not a bad thing. But if you're getting nothing out of it, if you're telling yourself it's just because you were bored, it's just because you needed something to mindlessly take in for a couple hours while you have nothing to do and not giving it any thought, then I think that's passive watching. An example of that would be, for example, I talked about like being desensitized to like profanity, If you're too passive, then you just absorb it and you don't think about it, and that can become something that becomes part of your life, using profanity and things you shouldn't say. And if you're an active consumer of not just movies, but really any media, you should always think through things. It's good to know what you know about things, and there's value in processing through things and knowing what you're taking in by what you watch and what you're exposed to. So,
okay. Let me ask you. So, you have the quote from Mark Twain, which has kind of become, since I read this in your thesis, I really like this quote. I've been reading it a lot and thinking about it a lot. But you say, so Mark Twain said, "Travel is fatal to prejudice, bigotry, and narrow-mindedness. And many of our people need it sorely on these accounts." For you personally, can you name a movie that has kind of been fatal to prejudice, bigotry, or narrow-mindedness for you? So maybe one where you feel like you grew and it like impacted, maybe even changed you as a person?
I know one. It's one that came out recently, is Nomadland, which is about people who they either live in their vans, they travel around, they don't have like a home, which they consider themselves to have a home. They say they're houseless, not homeless, but it's a good, and some of them do it by choice and some of them don't, and it's a good thing to watch, knowing how it's like. I have a home, I have a nice home, I have like a place to like live, and it's good to like watch that and see like the struggles that go along with not being as financially stable, or the difficulties in like getting jobs just so you can support yourself. And so it's good. That was one that did that for me, was just seeing their struggles with like their living situation, their financial like struggles and that kind of thing. So
yeah, good example. I just watched that this past weekend, and I agree completely. Yeah,
it's really good.
It sat with me for a while. So I guess one more question before I pass it on. Do you think there can be a benefit to having, as you said, some of the best movies are R-rated. Can there be a benefit to having sinful things in a film? So things that would make something R, so a benefit for language or maybe even sex or violence. Is there ever a time where that's needed and it actually benefits the story?
I'd say definitely, yeah. You can learn things from, something like Pixar movies, which are rated G or maybe PG. They're definitely pretty clear positive message in those, but you're not going to be able to get a very accurate, more complete like view of the world if you're not knowledgeable about some of the terrible things that go on here. So I think a good example of that one which a lot of people, if not, most people here have probably seen, is The Shawshank Redemption. What makes that movie so impactful, along with multiple things, is just the honesty in it. And it's all about hope and dealing with the situations you're in. And if they made that movie PG, it would not pack the emotional punch it has. You can't make an honest, truthful movie that takes place in a prison full of convicted men that's not rated R, and it be like honest with the audience. And yeah, so I think there's definitely a place for it. Or Saving Private Ryan, the violence in that serves a purpose. This is a fake depiction, and still terrible, like, to watch, of what men actually went through to like fight for what they believed in, fight for like your country or whatever. And if they tried to make a movie about D-Day or World War II, and cut out all the bad stuff, it would almost be disrespectful to what those men went through.
So real quick follow up to that. Then how do we as believers, as you talked about, kind of protecting ourselves from becoming desensitized and stuff? How then can we watch those impactful things with these heavy things in them or sinful things in them without being swayed?
So part of it is, I think when there is emotion behind it, when there is purpose behind it, it will stick out to you more because you're emotionally invested. But I think once again, it's just going back to not being a passive consumer. It's okay, that movie was violent. Why was it violent? Was there any purpose to it? There was sexual stuff in that movie. Was there any purpose behind it? What did I get any was there anything constructive about what it did with showing those things or not? And so I think to avoid, along the desensitization to violence, you're not actively thinking I'm becoming numb to the violence. I don't think most people are actively thinking that when they start to watch violent movies. I think it's a big part of it is just awareness, and it's hey, let's step back and think what am I getting out of these things,
Okay, thank you.
Well, thankfully you brought psychology into it. So I want to take a step back because I've observed some of this with you and your folks. I think part of your love for movies probably comes from your upbringing. So tell me about that, and tell me how your parents have impacted how you process film.
First off, it's I talk about Star Wars, which is, a movie that so many people have seen, and I talk about it. It's hey, that's a movie, and everyone knows it. It was my parents who introduced me to Star Wars, and so it's when you're young, it's your parents show you all these movies. It's when you're old enough, you watch Star Wars because so many people love it. I think a better example of it though is I talked about M. Night Shyamalan, who makes he largely makes horror movies or thrillers more like it. And when I was 13-ish, my parents showed me 3 of his movies: Signs, The Village, and Lady in the Water. And that was actually the first time I started to notice certain things. I noticed weird camera angles, and they were sorry. And they were oh, we like these movies. We saw them in theaters when they came out, and we thought you'd like them once you were a bit older. And so they showed me, and yeah, that was actually my a pretty clear introduction to the world of movies was watching those 3 movies with them. So,
okay. Side note: since you brought up M. Night, why do you think he always has to make a guest appearance in his movies?
I thought about this a little. It's if you made a movie, it's would you want to have a cameo or not? Would I want to? I think it'd just be fun. It's this is my movie. It's oh, look, there I am, like that. Yeah. So, I think it would just be kind of fun just to try to sneak yourself into a little appearance there. It's hey, that was, and it's also fun when directors do. It's if I'm watching a movie with someone and they're trying to be quiet and listen to it, I'm that's the director right there. You see him in the background, yeah.
Okay. Also, on this psychology note, you and I have talked about the fact that you really love the Joker, and I really hate that movie.
Yes, yeah.
So, do you think what is it about us as people that makes us really connect with a movie or not connect? Because it sounds like you're saying the empathy thing is what makes you connect with the Joker. But I consider myself a fairly empathetic person, maybe not as empathetic as some. But why do you think Like, why is that?
So I think most of the time when you feel empathy for a character, it's going to be the main character. And so as far as the story structure goes, you're constantly in the point of view of the character. So I think we as people just get really absorbed into stories. And I think when you see a movie that well made or whatever that follows different story structures that have been proven to I guess engage audiences more, it creates empathy with the character because you're transported, like I said, into their position. It's like no one wants to go through the things that Arthur Fleck, the Joker, wants to go to. No one wants to go through the things he went through, and it's from his point of view, and so it creates empathy because you're almost feeling like we're rooting for him. He's the main character, and I think. One reason that some people, not everyone did empathize with the Joker, that a big controversy around the movie was it making you empathize with, the psychopath that murders people and goes totally crazy at the end. And it is a bit extreme. It's definitely extreme in the empathy it tries to create. That's why it's so careful about before he does anything crazy. I mean, you see so much of his trauma before anything happens, so you get invested into his story. You see he's kind of the underdog, the guy that keeps getting stepped on, and you're wanting him to get out of that situation. And so when he finally does, the first time he does anything violent or illegal, I believe, if I remember correctly, is when he's being harassed by these three men on the train, and he snaps and he shoots them all. And so at that point, you've already come to really want him to get, because it's almost painful to watch, because it's man, he's really having a hard time. And you also see him getting bullied by other people. There's a lady who he's just being nice to this kid on the bus. And, excuse me. And he's making the kid laugh and just being friendly, and the lady's like, "Hey, stop it, you weirdo, get away from, my kid." And so it's the way, in that specific movie, it's the way they portray his character, making you feel bad for him. Yeah.
Okay. I'm going to pass it to Mr. Perea.
So this is an interesting experience for me, Nate, because I'm kind of intimidated in your presence right now. Because as I've been thinking about being on your panel, I realize there's a lot of other people who would be more qualified to sit in the seat than I am. I do love film, but I'm not a film critic by any means. And hey, what'd you think about that movie? Yeah, that was good. I liked it. That's about as deep as my analysis. I cried. And so I've been taking notes as you've been sharing, and I'm learning a lot. So thank you for picking something you're so passionate about. I also wanted to ask you what you thought your oral would be rated if it was rated on the same scale that movies are rated on.
Well,
because you have a lot of kids in the audience, I was just wondering.
Yeah, that's true. It'd probably be PG-13.
Okay. Did you design it that way on purpose?
I didn't design it. I wasn't purposefully let's throw in some older content, but but I definitely also told myself I'm not gonna sugarcoat things, because that's gonna just take away from the message I'm trying to get across. I'm not gonna, if I try to step around, I've used Saving Private Ryan multiple times. If I try to step around that and act like it doesn't exist, then it's...
I think that's good. And I guess we'll just put your cell phone number up if any parents need help with damage control after all this.
Yeah,
right?
yeah.
So, Mommy, what is this?
You can contact me at areed@mcanites.org.
So I guess that kind of spills into another thing I wanted your insight on, and I think your parents have taken a pretty active role in all this. And, you know, you talked about your parents introducing you to some things about the same age as my oldest kids right now. And so just like what advice would you give to parents who are just kind of afraid of like, man, how do I introduce my kids to the right ideas at the right time so they're not overrun, they're not corrupted, they're whatever all the things are that parents are afraid of. You don't know that yet until you're a parent. But just like, what advice would you give to parents? And then I'll ask about advice that you would give to people, to children too. So.
Yeah. So I'll go into a more, I guess, standard way, a less abstract way. You can do that in a minute. But the first thing I would say is to an extent, it relies on a person's maturity, and every parent, you're gonna know you're gonna know your kid better than anyone else. And every kid's gonna have a different level of maturity. I still think, even if your sixth grade kid is really mature for their age, don't take him to an R-rated movie. They're still, I mean, those systems are in place for reasons. So a less abstract way is just be informed. I mean, there are lots of resources like parents' guides. There's 3 different websites I know of, like IMDb, Common Sense Media, and Plugged In. So there are good resources for you to go read about specific things in the movies. In a specific movie, it'll have a category for how much sexual content is in it, how much violence, and so it's ultimate. I can't give like a definitive answer for every single age. It's going to depend on a person's maturity. I think a lot of R-rated movies, maybe it's not necessarily the content. Some R-rated movies, it's not necessarily the content that you want to make sure you don't show younger kids. I mean, it's like Silence is a good example of that. It is violent. It is rated R for violence, and so it's like you shouldn't show like a young kid that. But I think even then, you should probably only watch a movie like Silence when you're an older teenager, because you're going to appreciate it more. The older you get, you do learn more and more about the world, and you do like gain wisdom, and so it takes. I think it's also just being able to appreciate the movie more. But yeah, I would say just be informed about it. The ratings usually will be fairly accurate in my experience. If it's PG-13, it's probably okay for around that age. 13 years old is kind of the cutoff for that. But yeah.
So it sounds like do your homework as parents.
Yeah.
Probably watch with your kid things that are kind of on the border, and then at some point you just have to set them free, I guess.
Yeah, a good standard my mom always tried to tell me, and I didn't listen, was if you wouldn't watch it with me, then you can't watch it at all. So if you're going to be squirming in your seat as you're watching it with your kid, then it's probably But eventually it's like if your kid's 18 years old and you still won't let them watch a movie that says some bad words, you can't protect them from those things.
Sure. Okay.
Which isn't necessarily an excuse. Like it's like, oh, my kid's 12, he's going to hear those words eventually.
Yeah.
It's but yeah, it's do your homework. If it's rated R, screen it first. I mean, decide if it's something you're okay with your kid watching.
All right, I got 2 quick ones, and then we'll pass it back. But well, they're kind of all connected. But what's Graydon's favorite movie?
I think Monsters, Inc.
Oh, solid.
Yeah, Monsters, Inc. He's watched, or Home Alone. It's one of those 2.
Okay. So if you could spend time with any director, who would you pick?
Someone who's alive or anyone?
Either one.
I'd probably either say Martin Scorsese or Andrei Tarkovsky, who was a Russian filmmaker who died in 1986, but he was, one of them too. Scorsese, actually both of them, same reasons, because they're both they were very religious. Scorsese's Catholic, Tarkovsky was a Christian, and they, especially Tarkovsky, combined faith and their love for movies a lot. So,
what film would you direct if you could? Like, what's a story you would write if you had an unlimited budget?
Oh man.
And who would be in it?
Every once in a while I'll come up with a movie idea and I'm like, that's good, I gotta type it on my phone.
One day I'll be like, I knew him. He came up with that idea at the senior oral table.
One of my favorite ideas, if you know, like if you've ever seen a surrealist painting, surrealism is also a genre in film, and it's not even one I love to watch because it's really like disturbing or like confusing because it's like I don't know what's going on and I don't like it, but but it's still at the same time it's like this is cool, you know. So I'd love to make some sort of surreal film, like maybe like take an ordinary plot like a FBI agent investigating a death, but make no sense at all. Make it really surreal.
That seems fitting. And who would play you if there was a biopic or biopic? I don't know how to say it about you. Who would you want to play you, but who would play you?
Who would I want to play me? Oh man, Matt Damon.
Okay, yeah, good answer.
Who would play me?
Ed Sheeran, even though he's not a...
Yeah. Hey, he was in Yesterday, I think, so he could be technically considered an actor. Rupert Grint, there we go. Yeah.
Oh, nice.
Yeah, there we go.
Seth Green, there's a handful there. All right, so let me jump to some questions from the crowd. So, let's see here. So Miss Hinson asked, in addition to the mindset you watch it in, is there something valuable about viewing a film in a theater as opposed to streaming it at home?
I mean, I'm tempted to say yes because I love going to the movie theater, but I think as far as being mindful of what you're watching, I don't know if it really matters if you're streaming it on your TV at home or if you're going to a theater. I think it's more fun. I think it's just a better experience seeing it in a theater. Maybe if it's like, I think maybe the only exception would be like if you're like on a long road trip and you're watching like a movie on your phone and you can barely hear the audio, maybe you're not going to be able to take anything in as well as you can in the theater. But I think it's like if you've got a TV and you want to stream a movie on it, I don't know if it's more beneficial, really.
And then Cash Crunk, so this is interesting because this is a portion that you kind of took out, I believe. And I'll kind of shape it a little bit, but what would you say if there is an R-rated movie, he says specifically about abortion, do you think this would change or give a new perspective on the topic? So, I mean, in other words, do you think there can be a benefit to watching maybe an R-rated movie about something that as a Christian you would say like, oh, that's terrible, or that's putting forth some terrible idea?
Well, yes, there's definitely value in it because a lot of things like that, like something like abortion is not, there's not a clear, there's not a big majority on whether they think it's right or wrong on what people think about it. So I think with that, it's always good to understand the side that you're not on. You know, you don't want to blindly defend what you think you know without ever. I mean, you can't really know what you think you know if you haven't thought through things, and if you haven't thought through the other side, if you haven't considered, counter arguments, then you don't really, I don't think you can really say what you fully believe on it. And then as far as it's like an R-rated movie about abortion, I mean, I still think there's definitely value in it, because abortion is a thing that even people who support it, they know that abortion usually isn't a difficult thing to go through, and so it's still good to have, even though at least it's probably safe to assume most of us in here probably do not agree that abortion is okay. It's still always good to have empathy for people that aren't you and don't share the same thoughts. Yeah.
Okay. And then one more. This is a very Dunn question, so I like it. Annalie Dunn asked, why is it that when a book is converted into a movie, we feel that the movie is inferior to the book? Shouldn't the movie be acceptable by its own merits and the creative license of the director?
So a big thing with that is often you'll see a movie that's based on a book, and people either love it or hate it. And the people who love it are usually the people who watched the movie first, and the people who hate it are usually the people who read the book first. And it's because when you read the book, it's like the original story that you get so invested in and that you fall in love with. It's like, this book is amazing. And then you go and watch the movie, and they can't include everything. They may change things because they want to make it their own, as well as also just so they're not copying things. And it's disappointing because you had all these expectations. And then you watch a movie which is based on a book first before you've read the book, and it's like, it's like they're gonna have to cut things out and change things for the movie. You can't put a whole book in a 2-hour movie, and so then it's like you go back and read the book, and it's like, this is so cool. This is what kind of inspired the movie that I love, and it's cool to see the things that are in the book that I didn't get to experience first in the movie. So,
all right, I got one last question for you. So this kind of came to my mind this past week when we watched Jojo Rabbit in Fine Arts. There's a scene where the boy walks up to his mom, and she's looking at some Jewish people that were hung out in town square, basically. And he sees it, and he goes, "Oh, yuck," and he tries to look away, and his mom takes his face and makes him look, and she says, it's important for you to look. Do you think it's important for us to sometimes watch things that might make us uncomfortable, or something maybe that we don't even like, in order to, as you've kind of talked about, learn or grow or empathize?
I think there's definitely value to it. Like, there are some things you watch. It's like, one of my favorite movies ever is American Beauty, which you're probably horrified if you haven't seen it, but it's about me saying it that I like that movie. I'm not comfortable watching that movie. It's an uncomfortable movie to sit through, but it's the reason it can have so much impact still is because it's supposed to be uncomfortable. It should be uncomfortable, and the reason you can learn things is because what it's teaching you through the uncomfortableness. And the world isn't full of sunshine and rainbows all the time. It's a dark the world's a fallen, dark place, and there's value, and you shouldn't be pessimistic and like it's hopeless, the world's terrible. But you also have to be realistic about how things are. And as Christians, we're supposed to go out into the world and make a difference. And you can't do that properly if you're naive about how the world is. So, yeah.
Ironically, I think that film was actually written by a Christian, too. So.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
Oh, I think I've heard you say that.
I read it in some book. I don't know. All right. Do y'all have another final question before we turn it over?
I would ask about Flatlands, the movie, to impress Mr. Perea, but I'll bypass that one.
My favorite movie, yeah.
No, my question is, I'm so hung up on this Joker thing. But I'm going to take a different tact. So, Paradise Lost, the protagonist could be argued to be Satan.
Mhm.
Why? Like, what? And you can't use empathy in your answer.
Okay.
Why is that effective? And why did the author do that?
Oh man, that's a good question. It's I think seeing things from the point of view, like I said, like the main character, that's going to be the story. You see everything through the main character's point of view, and it's important. I mean, Paradise Lost is really theologically heavy, I guess you could say, and it's important to like get that side of the story of like the fall, and because you usually hear it's like God created the world and there's this bad dude named Satan who doesn't like it and doesn't like you, and it's and it's important to, I mean, like I said earlier, it's kind of like with any argument, you need to understand fully. You need to have a well-rounded view of things to know what you think about them and to be able to speak about them. If you're going to defend your beliefs against something, you need to know what they're going to come at you with. And so it's like with Paradise Lost, following a character who likely is Satan, basically Satan. It's just good to know the full story. It's good to know what was going on, and what could have been happening.
Okay, so I'm going to try to ask this briefly, but I really want to hear your perspective on it. The word came up a lot in your conversation, mostly that we're consumers of movies, and so it just makes me think a lot about food. You know, that you consume food, but then you can eat food that's not good for you, but then you have to like do stuff to like counterbalance that, basically. You have to, go to Crunch or whatever, and so I'm wondering like what's the counterbalance that you should be doing in order to, I don't know, overcome the effects of these things that Cash asked about or Mr. Reed did, in order to, I don't know, have those things not start to take their toll on you.
Yeah.
And don't say empathy.
So you have to have empathy. I mean, I think every once in a while it's like, I just watched a really dark movie. I need to go watch Back to the Future and cheer myself up or something like that. And so I think it's just, I mean, don't constantly fill your mind with only super depressing movies that are going to make you hate everything. I remember once when I was younger, I wanted to go see an R-rated movie, and the deal what I made with my parents was, you can go see that movie if you watch 7 movies of your mom's choice with her. And so I had to sit through like 7 romantic comedies, and it was terrible. But I wasn't well. In a way, I was super depressed after them because I was like, oh gosh, that was painful. But my mind wasn't full of dark things. It's like I wanted to go see that horror movie, which was like really creepy and disturbing. And
I guess what I'm wondering is like, is there like an action that you should ever do instead of just like watch another movie to like replace it with other?
Yeah, so outside of the realm of movies.
Yeah.
I mean, yeah, I think I'll say like a super general answer in a minute, but it's like in the realm of media, it's don't fill your mind with just the darkest. To me, it's like when you watch the news and it's like everything's depressing on the news. And I remember for our last we had to do a cultural event report in economics every Tuesday. And so for the last one, Miss Welch was like, it has to be happy news, because all of your news stories last week were super sad and depressing. And so it's just good to take a break from that stuff. It's like I said, the world isn't full of rainbow and sunshine and happiness all the time, but there still is sometimes. So it's as far as like a specific action you can take, it's outside of movies, it's.
Well, I'm fishing for something because I see you do this, and I think it's like you. I see Nate do this. It does give you empathy to watch movies, but then that like has to actually play itself out by you interacting with people.
Yeah.
And like, and I'd say by like serving people. And I see you do that in the, like a lot of the choices that you make. You do a lot of behind the scenes thing. You go to Camp Barnabas. It's like you are practicing empathy and not just like reading about empathy or filing another fact away about another people group. But it's like you have to actually do it, I think. And you do it. And I wanted to commend you for that. And it's
Thank
like
you.
it does need to turn into something, and I see that in Nate McQueen's life. So
Thank you. Yeah,
thank you.
Now I see what you mean, like putting that into effect. It's like, yeah, what are you going to get out of learning from relationships if you don't have any yourself?
Yeah. Okay, well, let's go. Your turn.
Okay, so it's just one question for all of you. What's one movie that has impacted you in some way other than like, oh, that was cool? And it can be anything from like just the general story that impacted you, or if there was something specific about a character you found, inspiring or something like that. Yeah.
Well, of course, mine is Flatland, and
Naturally, yeah.
just kidding. Gosh, I'm not that lame. Actually, I had a better answer and then I forgot it, and so I'll go to one of my defaults. I guess I saw the movie before I read the book, and so maybe that's why I love the movie. But Les Mis, with Liam Neeson as Valjean and Jeffrey Rush as Javert, and just seeing like the way that like real forgiveness, like when embraced, that's basically what Valjean experienced, like how that really did actually lead him to have empathy for other people and act on it. Because he had been broken and been given a second chance, and so I have found myself like in several moments across my life thinking, WWJVD, what would Jean Valjean do? There we go. And so yeah, he became one of my heroes, I guess, to borrow Leah's phrase. So there.
I'd say for me, The Boy in the Striped Pajamas, just because I had read books from that general perspective, but seeing it on screen really brought it to life in a new way. So.
Oh man, this is such a hard question. I probably would have gone with something recent, like the one you stole earlier with Nomadland, but you already said that one. So one that's always stuck with me is Pan's Labyrinth, which isn't everyone's kind of cup of tea as far as movies go, because one, it's a foreign film, and Americans hate foreign films generally, and two, it's pretty dark, and it's basically an adult fairy tale, which is a very small genre, and the reason why I like it is it's beautiful in its darkness, and so it's about a young girl who is going through the Spanish Civil War, and in trying to cope with that, well, there's different readings you can have, but basically creates a fantasy world, and so that just sat with me on the tragedies that our world goes through right now and everything, and have for years, that there's different ways of looking at things, there's different ways to kind of interpret things, and you can always find beauty in the midst of ugliness and stuff, and so it's always been a fascinating film that's stuck with me over the years. So yeah. All right, do you want to pray for us and we'll close it out?
Father, thank you for Nate and thank you for all that he's contributed to MCA over his years here. Thank you for his passion, and I pray that you will bless him as he moves forward and guide his steps and help him to continue to enjoy his passion for movies and invest in folks. In Christ's name we pray. Amen.
Amen.